Begin today on the bottom of Daf Yud Amud Beis, the last line. The Gemara is bringing many different Amirayim. Before they began to darshan the parsha of the Megillah, they would give an introduction of a different pasuk. Rav Dimi bar Yitzchak, pasuk la pischa lahai parsha semahacha. He would begin darshaning the Megillah with the following pasuk. It says, Ki avodim anachnu, we are slaves. Ubavduseinu lo yazavnu lekeinu, and in our slavery the Eibishter has not left us. Vayet aleinu chased, and the Eibishter put upon us his kindness, lifnei malchei paras, in front of the kings of paras. Emasai, when is this? Bisman Haman, in the time of the Gzeira of Haman, or others are going to say Bisman Mordechai, the kindness of Hashem through Mordechai. Rab Chanina bar Papa pasach la pischalai parsha semahacha began with this pasuk. Hirkafta enish l'reishenu. You've brought someone to ride above our heads. Banu be'eshu b'mayim. We also came into fire and into water. What is this referring to? Be'esh. We were brought into fire b'mei Nebuchadnezzar. In the times of Nebuchadnezzar that threw the Yidden in fire. Nebuchadnezzar Rasha. Or b'mayim, and into water b'mei Paroi. That's in the times of Paroi. That in this week's parsha, Kol habena yila de yoyre tashlichut. The baby should be thrown into water. V'tatzienu l'revaya, and you've brought us out into abundance. That's the continuation of the pasuk. B'mei Haman. This is in the times of Haman when the Eibishter saved us. Rabbi Yochanan pasach la pischalei parsha semahacha. Rabbi Yochanan began from here. Zocha chazdei v'emunasa leveis Yisrael. The Eibishter remembers his kindness and his faithfulness to the Yidden. Ro kolaf seyaretz. The entire world saw as Yeshua Selekenu. The Eibishter saved them. Emisai, when was this? Emisai ro kolaf seyaretz as Yeshua Selekenu. When was the entire world made known that they should see what Eibishter did? B'mei Mordechai v'Esther. This was by the Yeshua of Mordechai and Esther. So Rashi says, because they sent letters to the entire world to let everyone know about what's going on, so the message got out to the entire world. Achashverosh was Moshel B'Kippah, so everyone knew. Shlakish pasach la pischalai parshas mehacha. Shlakish would open with the following pasuk: Ari noyim, a lion comes and roars. V'doiv sheikik, and a bear is sheikik, which is what's the translation in English? Rowling. So what and Moshel Rasha al Amdal. And then you have a Rasha that rules over a poor nation. So who is this referring to? Ari Noyim, the lion that comes and roars, Zen Nebuchadnezzar Rasha. This refers to Nebuchadnezzar. The Chsiv Beit says regarding Nebuchadnezzar, when he came to destroy the Beis HaMikdash, Allah Arye Misubchay. The lion came up from the thicket. Doiv Sheikik Zeh Achashverosh, the bear that is Achashverosh. The Chsiv Beit, regarding Achashverosh, it says, V'aru Chiva Achri, another beast came up, Tinyana, a second one, Damya L'Doiv, compared to a bear. Why are they compared to a bear? Tani Rav Yosef, so Rav Yosef said, Elu Parsiim, this refers to the Persians, Sha'eichlin v'shaisin kedoiv, they eat and drink like a bear, u'musurbalim basar kedoiv, and are fat with flesh like a bear, u'megadlin seir kedoiv, and they grow hair like a bear, ve'en lem menucha kedoiv, and they can't rest like a bear that's always walking around back and forth. So these are the Persians, and that's what it means, Achashverosh, that came up to make a Gzeir on Yidden. Moshel Rasha, the Rasha that rules over Yidden, Zeh Haman, this is Haman. Al Amdal, and the poor nation, Eli Yisrael, Shem Dalim in our mitzvahs. The Yidden are poor if they don't have mitzvahs. Rabbi Lazar pasach la pischalai parsha semahacha. Rabbi Lazar would begin with the following pasuk: Batzaltayim yimach hamakare. With laziness, the roofer becomes poor. Or b'shiflus yadayim yidloif abayis. And if you're lazy with your hands, so then the house will leak. So what does this mean? B'shvil atzlos shahayalem liyisrael, because of the laziness that Yidden had, shalei osku b'teira, that they didn't learn Teira. Nasa soinoi shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu mach. So soinoi shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, a euphemism used regarding the Eibishter himself. So he became weak or poor. Ve'mach ela'ani. Mach means that he's poor. Shenema ve'machu me'erkecha. If he becomes poor. And ve'mekare, when he uses the term here, the roofer, El HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This is the Eibishter. Shenema akarim b'mayim al Yosef. The Eibishter has a roof of water in heaven. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, pasach la pischalai parsha semahacha. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak began from here. Shira ma'alois, lulei Hashem shahaya lanu yemina Yisrael. The Yidden say, if not for the fact that the Eibishter was with us, lulei Hashem shahaya lanu b'kum aleinu Adam. If the Eibishter wasn't with us, when a man stood up against us. So who's this man? Adam v'loi melech. Melech. It was a man and not a king, referring to Haman, that wasn't a king. Rava pasach la pischalai parsha semahacha. Rava began with the following pasuk: Be'revois tzadikim yismach ha'am. When the tzadikim are great, the nation is happy. B'mshel rasha yenacham. And when the rasha is ruling, so then the people are groaning. But tzadikim mispacha am zeh Mordechai. This refers to Mordechai, Esther. That there was all the celebration and the joy. That's when Haman came and was ruling over the Yidden. When the Yidden were mourning. Rav Masna would begin the parsha from the Megillah with this pasuk. Kimi goy gadol. Who's the great nation, that has the Eibishter that's close to them and save them from the Gzeira of Haman. The following pasuk where it says, sorry, Oya Nisa Elikim v'Goymer, that the Eibishter tests the Yidden. This is a pasuk that it says regarding Yetzias Mitzrayim, that the Eibishter takes the Yidden. I'm going to need a cup of water if you don't mind. Sorry. The Eibishter takes the Yidden out of Mitzrayim, right? That's the continuation of that pasuk. So the same thing is also here regarding the Gzeira of Haman, that the Yidden were saved. Thank you very much. Okay, so now the Gemara begins darshaning the Megillah itself, but the Gra actually takes this little drasha here and puts it a little bit further in the Gemara, because in the continuation there is going to be other Amayraim as well that the Gemara will tell us how they would open before we actually darshan the Megillah itself. But this pasuk itself is the first drasha on the Megillah itself. So the first pasuk is Vayihi b'mei Achashverosh. Amarav, so Rav said, what's Vayihi? Vai vihi. It's two expressions of pain. That is the pain of Vai and pain of He. This is what it says. You'll be sold over there. You'll be offered to be sold as slaves and as maids. And then the pasuk there continues, and no one's going to want to buy you. So it's a double pain. You're going to be in a place of slavery, and no one's going to want to buy you, because why? Instead, you're going to be killed. Or in this case, there was a gzeira that they should be killed. That's the vai and the he. But now the Gemara continues, as I said, to bring different Amirayim, how they began darshaning the Megillah. Shmuel says, you begin the Megillah with the following pasuk: Lo ma'astim v'lo ga'altim l'chaloisam. The Eibishter says, I did not, that the Yidden were not rejected by me, the Yidden were not abhorred by me, l'chaloisam, to destroy them. Lo ma'astim b'mei Yevonim. This is in the time when the Yevonim came to Eretz Yisrael. Lo ga'altim b'mei Nebuchadnezzar. That's in the times when Nebuchadnezzar came. L'chaloisam b'mei Haman. And they were not destroyed in the times of Haman. L'hafer birisi itam. And the Eibishter did not annul his covenant that he has with Yidden. Bimei Parsiim. This is in the times of the Parsiim, or some take out Parsiim, and instead our grade is Bimei Roimiim, that later, after the destruction of the second Beis HaMikdash, even after the Romans came, still the Eibishter does not forsake the Yidden. And then when it says, Ki ani Hashem Elokeim, I am your God, this goes on Lasad Lavai, Bimei Goy Gumagag. Even when there's going to be great wars, then the Eibishter will not forsake Yidden. The Masnit Tane and Abraisa we learned a bit differently. Loi Mastim Bimei Kasdiim. Loi Mastim refers in the times of the Kasdiim. Kasdiim is another name for the Babylonians, which is in the time of Nebuchadnezzar. Shamarati Lehem, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, Vazariah. The Eibishter gave Yidden these great tzaddikim even in the time of that Golus. Loi Galtim Bimei Yevonim. Eibishter does not abhor Yidden in the times of the Yevonim. Shamarti Lehem Shimon HaTzadik. The Eibishter also gave him great tzaddikim. This Shimon HaTzadik, Chashmonai Yebanov, Matisyahu Kohen Gadol. So according to the Girsa that we have here in our Gemara, Chashmonai Yebanov and Matisyahu Kohen Gadol are two different individuals. But that's not what we say in the Nusach of Al Anisim. We say Bimei Matisyahu ben Yechanan Kohen Gadol Chashmonai Yebanov. So there's another Girsa here that Matisyahu ben Yechanan Kohen Gadol v'Chashmonai Yebanov, that it goes together. L'chaloisam, that they were not destroyed. Bimei Haman shemarati lehem Mordechai v'Esther, that I gave them Mordechai and Esther. L'hafer brisi itam, which is Bimei Roimiim, according to the other version here, in the times of the Churban of the second Beis HaMikdash to the Romans. Shemarati lehem shel beis Rebbe v'chachmei deiris, that I gave them the house of Rebbe, and so too in all future generations there's the chachmei deiris. In every generation there's the tzaddikim and the chachmei deiris that are amongst the Yidden, and therefore you see that the Eibishter never forsakes Yidden. Ki ani Hashem Elokeim lo asad lavai. This goes on the future. She'ein kol umma v'lashem yichayla lishloit behem. when no nation will be able to rule over the Yidden. Rab Levi Amar, when Rab Levi began to darshan the Megillah, so he began with this pasuk, Mehacha, V'im lo yiseirishu es yoshvei haaretz. If you're not going to get rid and expel the Goyim that are living in Eretz Yisrael, you're going to have problems from them. And this is connected to what happened in the story of the Megillah. Because Shaul HaMelech did not kill Agag when he was supposed to, so then they suffered from Haman that came from Agag later. Just like I wanted to do to them, to the Goyim, es alachem, I will do to you, which was the Gzeira of Haman that came upon Yidden. Okay, so now here we actually start the details of darshaning the Megillah itself. So before we had the drasha of Yehi B'mei Achashverosh, but now the Gemara darshans the name. What does Achashverosh mean? Achashverosh Amarav Achiv Shel Rosh. He's the brother of Rosh, which refers to Nebuchadnezzar, as the Gemara will say. Ben Giloi Shel Rosh, and he has the same mazel. He's very similar. He thinks the same as Rosh, as Nebuchadnezzar. Achiv Shel Rosh and Achiv Shel Nebuchadnezzar. That means Nebuchadnezzar Rasha. He's the brother of Nebuchadnezzar Rasha, Shenikra Rosh. In the pasuk he's called a head. Shenema Antu Reisha Didave. You're the head of the gold. Ben Giloi Shel Rosh. You are similar to the head. How? In what way is he similar? Hu Harag. Nebuchadnezzar is killed Yidden, and who Bikish Larag. Achashverosh also wanted to kill the Yidden. Hu Hechriv. Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the Beis HaMikdash. Hu Bikish Lahachriv. He also wanted to destroy the Beis HaMikdash. This refers to the fact that already before Achashverosh there was a king by the name of Kairish. And that king allowed Yidden to lay the foundations for the Beis HaMikdash. And then Achashverosh told them to destroy it. He wanted them to go and destroy these foundations of the Beis HaMikdash. Shenema, the pasuk says, "V'malchus Achashverosh, b'tchilas malchusei, kasvu sitna yeshve Yehudi v'Yerushalayim." So there were people in Eretz Yisrael that hated the Yidden, and they wrote a letter of hatred to Achashverosh to tell him to have the Yidden destroy the foundation of the Beis HaMikdash. Shmuel Mashmuel says another interpretation of Achashverosh, Hushcheru Pneim Shal Yisrael. The faces of the Yidden became black b'yomav in his days, k'shulei kedera, like the bottom of a pot. Rabbi Yechanan says, Kol shezoichroi, anybody that remembers about Achashverosh, Oyamar said, Och l'reishai, oi to my head. Rab Chanina said, Shakoil nasu Roshim b'yomav. Everybody became poor in his days. There were so many taxes. Shenema vayasam hamelech Achashverosh mas. Achashverosh taxed everybody to become poor. Weiter we darshan in the Megillah, it says, Hu Achashverosh. Why does it say Hu Achashverosh? Hu berishai mitchilasai ve'at saifai. He remained a Rasha throughout, from the beginning until the end. Even in the end, when it seems like that he annulled the decree and so on, but nevertheless, Achashverosh himself remained wicked from the beginning till the end. Similar drasha, Hu Esav. When it says in the pasuk, Hu Esav, Hu berishai mitchilasai ve'at saifai, he also remained wicked from the beginning till the end. When it says Hu Dasan Va'irvira and Hein Birishan B'Tchilasan Vatseifan, they remained with their dishes from the beginning until the very end. Hu Amelech Achaz, also by Achaz, Hu Birishan B'Tchilasan Vatseifa. He was a Rasha from the beginning until the end. And now we darshan similar this lashon of Hu in the positive. Avram, Hu Avraham. When it says that Avram is Avraham, Hu B'Tzitkai B'Tchilasan Vatseifa. He's righteous from the beginning until the end. Hu Areinu Moshe, which is in next week's parsha. So it says that they are Aaron and Moshe, Hein b'tzitkan mitchilasan ve'at saifan. They remained with their tzitkas from the beginning until the end. And then it says, V'David hu akatan. David was small, he was humble. Hu b'katnusa. He is small, mitchilasai ve'at saifai. Which means, Kishem sheb'katnusa hitken atzmai. Just like when he was small, before he was a king, he was humble. So he was small in front of someone that's greater than him in Torah. Even when he was a king, he was small in front of someone that was greater than him and with wisdom. He learned even from a person like Achitophel, and he always held himself humble. Next, to go on the Megillah, Hamelech. So it says Hamelech, that he is a king. Amarav, what this means is, Shemalach me'atzmai. He appointed himself as a king. The pasuk begins talking with a past tense. Vayihi b'mei Achashverosh. Then it says Ha-Melech, that presently he is king. Why does it change the terminology? Because he made himself a king. That's what the Maharsha says there. Now, Amri lo l'shvach. Someone say that this is a praiseworthy thing. Amri lo l'gnai. And some say no, it's to his disgrace. Amri lo l'shvach. There was nobody else that was as chashav to be a king like him. And others say that this is a disgrace. He was not worthy to be a king. He had extra money and he bought his way into becoming the king. Then it says in the Megillah, that he ruled from Hoidu to Kush. Rav and Shmuel argue about this. Chad Amar Hoidu b'Seif Ha'olam, v'Kush b'Seif Ha'olam. So one says that Hoidu is in one end of the world and Kush is in the other end of the world. And V'chad Amar Hoidu v'Kush gabi adodi avakaimi, that Hoidu and Kush are right near each other. And what is the Megillah saying? Kishem shemalach al Hoidu v'Kush, just like he's a king over these two cities that are right near each other. Kach malach misoif ha'olam v'atzoifai. So too he's a king from one end of the world to the other end of the world. So the Rebbe in the Sikha brings this machlokes here in connection to what it says in this week's parsha about Rav and Shmuel that argue about Vahi Melech Chodosh, that there's a new king. One says that there was actually a new king, the literal pshat, and the other says Shenischachu Gzeiroisov, that there was new Gzeiris that he made upon the Yidden. So the Rebbe says over here, this machlokes on Rav and Shmuel is similar to that. If you say that so the Rebbe first over there in the Sikha, in the Ha'ara, brings what it says in the Manis HaLevi, they're not arguing over here about the actual Metzias, whether Hoidu and Kush were near each other or whether Hoidu and Kush were far away from each other. Hoidu and Kush were right near each other. But it depends how you look at it. If you look at it from one direction, so then they're right near each other. If you're facing the other direction on the other side of the city of Hoidu, you're going to have to travel around the entire world to come back to Kush. The question is what the Megillah means. Are we talking about the direction around the entire world? So that's saying that simple pshat. It's coming to say that Achashverosh was a king over the entire world. Or we're trying to say a deeper point. Just like Achashverosh is a king over these two cities of Hoidu and Kush, and when you have two cities that are not right near each other, your control is much more powerful. It's very close. It's right here under your dominion. So too, he had that same powerful control over the entire world. So it's the extent of his melucha, how powerful he was in every single place in the world, just like Hoidu and Kush. That's the machlokes here of Rav and Shmuel. Now, similar, we say that he ruled from Tifsach until Azah. This says about Shlomo Melech. So again, Rav and Shmuel Chadama Tifsach b'Seif Ha'olam. Azah b'Seif Ha'olam. One says that Tifsach was on one end of the world and Azah was on the other end of the world. Chadama Tifsach v'Azah b'Hadi Adodi Avakaima. They're right near each other. Kshem Shamalach al Tifsach v'Azah. Just like he rules over these two places near each other. Kach Malach HaKol Ha'olam Kuloi. In the same way, he ruled over the entire world. Continuing in the Megillah, it says Sheva ve'Esrim u'Meya Medina, 127 countries. But first it says Sheva, then Esrim, and then Meya. So Rav Chizda b'tchila malach al Sheva. In the beginning, he was a king over 7 countries. Ula b'Seif malach al Esrim, then on 20. And then Ula b'Seif malach al Meya, and then also an additional 100. And then so eventually he came to rule over the entire world, 127 countries. Elamayata, so the Gemara says, if that's how you dash in this here, Shnei Chaye Yamram, when it says the life of Amram, this is in this week's parsha, when he went to get remarried to Yechevet, so it says, how old was he? Sheva u'shloishim u'ma'as shana. First it says 7, then 30, and then 100 years. So my darshas bay. So what are you going to dash in here? Over here, he was 137 years old. You can't dash in the same way you just dashed by Achashverosh. So the Gemara says, Shani hacha, here by the pasuk in the Megillah, it's different. The Kra Yiseiruhu, because this is an extra pasuk. Mechti, let's see. Ksiv, it already says Mahaidu Kush, that he ruled from Haidu to Kush. That means the entire world. Now Sheva v'Eser Mamei Medina Lamali. So why does it have to spell out all the countries of the world? Shmamin al drasha. So this is coming to tell me the drasha that it was a slow thing. That first 7, then 20, then 100. And the Mefarshim say that he only came to actually rule over all 127 countries after he married Esther. And it was really b'schus Esther, as it says in the Midrashim, b'schus the fact she came from Sarah, which lived 127 years, so she was Moshel over 127 Medinas. Tana Rabbanon, so in connection to Achashverosh's Melucha, which is over the entire world, we learned in Abraisa, Shloisha Malchu Bekippah. There are 3 that ruled over the dome of the sky, meaning over the entire world. Ve'eluhein, Achav, V'Achashverosh, and Nebuchadnezzar. Achav, so Achav, the Chsivit says in the Pasuk, Chai Hashem Alakecha, that live Hashem im yesh goyim amlocha shalei shalach adoni shon levakshecha. Is there any kingdom, is there any nation that I have not sent there to search for you? This is when Achav was searching for Eliyahu. So he sent to every single government and kingdom in the world, and he made them swear that Eliyahu was not with them. Now, if he did not rule over all of them, how could he have them swear to him that they don't have Eliyahu? He has no control over them. Elamai, he did. He controlled all kingdoms in the world. Nebuchadnezzar, we see that he was a ruler over the whole world. It'll be any nation or kingdom that will not give its neck to be under the yoke of the king of Bavel. So he had everybody under his control. Achashverosh hada amaron. Achashverosh, as we've mentioned, the entire world. If you look here in the small Tosfos, he says Alexandrus Moikden also ruled over the entire world. But because there's no pasuk that we have as a source for that, so the Gemara doesn't bring it. Simin Shasadrach. The Gemara here is going to ask, Shazdach that is. The Gemara is going to ask that it's seemingly there are other individuals that we find that they ruled over the entire world. Fragt the Gemara v'su leke, v'ha ikke Shleime. There's also Shleime Melech that ruled over the entire world. We just mentioned before, from Tiftach until Laza, that he ruled over the entire world. So the Gemara says, but Leisalek Malchuse, his kingdom did not last. Eventually, Shlomo Melech was forced to to go off his throne. This is a story in Masechta Gittin where it discusses Ashmedai, the Rosh of the Shadim, that came and removed Shlomo Melech from his throne. The whole story there. So therefore, his Melucha didn't last. So the Gemara, that would be a good answer according to the one that says Malach and then the Hedyet. First he was a king, and then he became a commoner. And that's it, and his kingdom ended in his lifetime. El Lemanda Omar Melech v'Hedyet Melech. He was a king, but then he was removed from his throne. But then at the end, he was returned to his kingdom. So the Ma'ikal Meima. Why don't we count Shlomo Melech as one of those that ruled over the entire world? So the Gemara says an opposite answer. Shlomo milsachrita v'bei. Shlomo had something even much greater than this. Shemalach al Yainim v'al Tachtainim. Not only did he rule over everything in this world, he ruled over all Al Yainim as well. Shana, the pasuk says, "Vayeshuv Shlomo al Kisei Hashem," that he sat on the throne of the Eibishter. So he ruled over below and above as well. The Gemara v'Av Sancherev. Besides this, you also have Sancherev that ruled over the entire world. Echsiv mi b'chol alakei aratzis ha'ele asher tzilu es artza miyadi. From all of these countries and cities, who can be saved from my hands? He has control over everything. So the Gemara says, besides one place, but ha'ike or ha'ave Yerushalayim the loikavsha. But there's Yerushalayim that he did not conquer. He came to Yerushalayim, he tried, and he was not successful in conquering Yerushalayim. Like the Gemara, v'ha'ike der Yavish. There's der Yavish that also ruled over the entire world. Echsiv der Yavish Malka, Kasav l'cholam emaya umaya. He wrote to all nations, v'lishna, and to all languages. The died in b'chol ara that are living in all countries. Shlomchan yizge. Your peace should be a lot. So in other words, he wrote a letter to everybody, and he was ruled over everybody in the world. So the Gemara says, no, not everybody. There are 7 countries that he did not rule over them. Even if he wrote this letter to everybody, but 7 countries he didn't rule over them. The Chsiv is a pasuk that says, Shvar kodem der Yavish, that it was a good idea in front of der Yavish, ve'hekem al malchusa, that he brought his kingdom to he sent from his kingdom Achtar Pnaya, the messengers, to 120 countries. So it says here 120. What happened to the other 7 that it says Vayachashverish? So there were 7 that he didn't rule over. The final one the Gemara asks for ha'ike Kaidish, but isn't there Kaidish that also ruled over all the countries of the world? Ichsiv Kayam HaKaidish Melech Paras Kol Mamlochai Sa'aretz Nosan Li Hashem. All of the kingdoms of the world Hashem gave into my hands. So the Gemara says, Hasam, that doesn't mean that he actually ruled over everything. He was praising himself that this is what he has, but he didn't actually have it. He didn't have the rulership over the entire world. Okay, continuing darshaning the Megillah. What does it say? By Yomim Aheim, and it wasn't those days. Kisheves HaMelech, when the king sat on his throne. So it sounds like we're speaking about just as he became king. But then Uksiv, Basrei, afterwards it says, B'shnas Shalosh L'malchai. They were talking about the 3rd year of his kingdom. So this is sort of a contradiction. Amarove, my Kisheves, what does Kisheves mean? Not when he just became king. La'acha shenis yashva daitai. After he calmed down. And that took 3 years for him to become very, very settled and confident on his throne. As Rashi explains, because in the beginning, he thought that the Yidden are going to be redeemed from Galus and they're going to go build a Beis HaMikdash which will threaten his whole kingdom. But after 3 years, when he saw that the Yidden did not build a Beis HaMikdash, now he became confident on his throne. Why is that? So Omar Achashverosh said, Belshazzar choshev v'to. Belshazzar made a calculation regarding when Yidden are going to be redeemed, and he saw that promise that Yidden had that they're going to be redeemed. What was the promise Yidden had? As we're going to learn here now about Barichas, the whole cheshbon, Yidden had a promise that they're going to be redeemed after 70 years. So Belshazzar made a cheshbon of 70 years. And he saw the Yidden were not redeemed, so he thought, that's it. He's confident on his throne and he can do what he wants. But V'toi made a mistake. Ano, Achashverosh says, I will make a calculation, and I'm not going to make a mistake. So what is this calculation? So we're going to go through now some different numbers here. And basically, what the Gemara is going to point out, there's the calculation that Belshazzar made, and he was short quite a few number of years. Then there's the calculation Achashverosh made. He was also short a few years. And then there's the real calculation, when the Eibusher Taka had the Beis HaMikdash begin being rebuilt again. So what happens? Now the Chsev, so the Pasuk says, Ki lefli melois leBavel shivim shana, that when it's going to be filled for Bavel 70 years, Efked Eschem, I will remember you. That's the Pasuk. Now Chsev, there's another Pasuk where it says it a little bit differently. L'malais l'charvis Yerushalayim shivim shana, when it'll come to be filled 70 years from when Yerushalayim is destroyed, then that's when the Yidden are going to be redeemed. Okay, so some are actually not guided this pasuk over here, because the second pasuk that we just read, because this second pasuk is not the cheshbon that Belshazzar made. Belshazzar made the cheshbon based on the first pasuk, because what you see in the first pasuk is, how do you count 70 years? 70 years from exactly when? So it says leBavel. Belshazzar understood what that means is from when the rulership, from when the kingdom of Bavel began. From when Nebuchadnezzar became king, you count from then 70 years, and that's when the Yidden will be redeemed. In other words, not necessarily from the time of when the Yidden were exiled from Eretz Yisrael, not necessarily in the time when the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, but from when Nebuchadnezzar became a king. Just as we'll see in the Hemshech of the Gemara, just as an introduction, first Nebuchadnezzar became king, and then he exiled the Yidden once, but he didn't yet destroy the Beis HaMikdash. And then, eventually, he exiled the Yidden a second time and he destroyed the Beis HaMikdash. So we have 3 different time periods to count from. Either from when he was appointed as king, or when he was exiled a big number of Yidden the first time, or when he exiled the Yidden the second time. So that's what the Gemara is going to speak about here now. So the Gemara says as follows. Now, Shivim Shana. Sorry, that's part of the pasuk. L'malais l'charvis Yerushalayim Shivim Shana. So now, Chashoiv Arbain v'chamesh Nebuchadnezzar. So you have 45 years, which is the number of years of how long Nebuchadnezzar was a king. And the Gemara soon is going to prove this. How do we know that he was 45 years a king? And the Esrim v'tlas, and then there's another 23 years for the king after Nebuchadnezzar, the Evil Mereidich. And then V'tarti Didei, and then another 2 years for Belshazzar, which was the third king of Bavel, and then Hashivim. This is 70 years. So what happened after he saw that the kingdom of Bavel lasted for 70 years and the Yidden are still not being redeemed? Apek mani de Beis Mikdash. So he took the vessels of the Beis HaMikdash out. Until that point he was afraid. But now at this point he said the Yidden are not going to be redeemed anymore. He took out the kelim of the Beis HaMikdash, v'yishtamish buhu, and he used them. Okay, so now the Gemara makes the cheshbon. How do we know that Nebuchadnezzar ruled for 45 years? Nebuchadnezzar minala and darbain v'chamish nin malach. How do we know that he ruled 45 years? Because the master said as follows. Galu b'sheva. There's one pasuk that it says that the Yidden were exiled in the 7th year. Galu b'shmeina. Another pasuk says Yidden were exiled in the 8th year. And then there's a third pasuk that says Galu b'shmein esra, that Yidden were exiled in the 18th year. And then it also says in a fourth pasuk, Galu b'cha esra, that the Yidden were exiled in the 19th year. So you take all these different psukim, it seems like the Yidden were exiled 4 different stages. But as the Gemara will explain, it's actually not in 4 stages. It's like I said before, in 2 stages. When it says Shiva and Shmeina, that's one stage. Shiva and Shmeina go together. And when it says Shmein Esra and Shah Esra, those 2 go together. How do they go together? Says the Gemara is going to explain now. Shiva refers to the number of years of the Yiddish king. And then Shmeina refers to the number of years of Nebuchadnezzar, the Goyish king. And similar when it comes to Shmein Esra and Shah Esra. Shmein Esra refers to the number of years of Nebuchadnezzar. And Shah Esra refers to the number of years of the Yiddish king. Or the other way around, actually. Shmein Esra refers to the number of years of the Yiddish king, and Shah Esra refers to the number of years that it is from Nebuchadnezzar. So let's see, the Gemara explains now. Galu b'sheva l'kibush yayakim. When it says Sheva, it means the 7th year after Nebuchadnezzar came and conquered Eretz Yisrael. He came and conquered the Melucha of Yayakim. Okay, so Nebuchadnezzar came and conquered Eretz Yisrael. Yehoiakim was then the king. Nebuchadnezzar did not expel the Yidden from Eretz Yisrael immediately. He conquered Eretz Yisrael. He conquered the kingdom of Yehoiakim. That's what it means, Sheva. And this is what's called Galus Yehoiachin. At that point, after 7 years, Yehoiakim wasn't alive anymore. Yehoiachin was the one that was the king. And Nebuchadnezzar came, and this was the first exile where the Yidden went into Galus. That's called Galus Yehoiachin. Shehishmaina Nebuchadnezzar. And this was in the 8th year of Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom. In other words, Nebuchadnezzar became a king 1 year before he came and conquered Eretz Yisrael. So it was 7 years from when he conquered the Eretz Yisrael, which was the kingdom of Yehoiakim. And again, it's 7 years from Yehoiakim and 8 years from when Nebuchadnezzar became king. That's the first Galus. Galu, then when it says Galu b'shmay nesre l'kibush Yehoiakim, that the Yidden went into Galus in the 18th year. What does the 18th year refer to? It refers to 18 years from after Yehoiakim, which is Eretz Yisrael, was conquered. Okay, so this is 11 years later. The first Galus was 7 years after Yehoiakim was conquered. This is 18 years after Yehoiakim was conquered. So this is 11 years later. So this is what's called Galus Tzidkiyahu. At that point, who was the king in Eretz Yisrael? Tzidkiyahu. This is actually the time when the Yidden were, the second time they were exiled, and this is when the Beis HaMikdash was actually destroyed completely. And Shehi Chas Nebuchadnezzar, which is the 19th year from when Nebuchadnezzar was appointed as a king. The Gemara brings a source for this. The master had said, Shana Rishayna, the first year Nebuchadnezzar became a king, he didn't immediately go to Eretz Yisrael to conquer Eretz Yisrael. First, Kibish Ninveh. First he went and conquered Ninveh. Why did he go first to Ninveh? Who did Melech Bavel, which is Nebuchadnezzar, take over his kingdom from? He took over his kingdom from the Melech Ashur. Melech Ashur, the capital city of Ashur, was not in Bavel, it was in Ninveh. So the first thing is he went to conquer Ninveh, because that's who he took over his kingdom from. And then Shniya, the second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, Kabash Yehoiakim, he came and conquered Yehoiakim, he conquered Eretz Yisrael. Okay, so now we see that how much before the actual Galus did he conquer? After the first, how long before the first Galus did he conquer Eretz Yisrael? 8 years from when he began being king. And then there's a pasuk that says, Vayihi b'shloishim v'sheva shana legalus Yehoiachin. And it was 37 years after Yehoiachin, Melech Yehuda, came into Galus. This is the first Galus. So 37 years after that, B'shneim asa chaydish b'esrim v'chamisha l'chaydish. It was in the 12th month, on the 25th day of the 12th month. So now Nebuchadnezzar was not alive anymore. That's when he died. Nasa Evel Mereidach Melech Bavel B'shnas Malchusa Esroi Yehoiachin Melech Yehuda. So the new king Evel Mereidach raised up the head of Yehoiachin Melech Yehuda Vayetzeisem Mibeis HaKela, and he took him out of the prison. So what does this mean? That Nebuchadnezzar did this. Nebuchadnezzar continued ruling for another 37 years. He ruled 8 years until he expelled the Yidden from Eretz Yisrael the first time. And then he ruled an additional 37 years, and then he died. And then the next king, Evel Mereidach, freed the king Yehoiachin. So therefore the Gemara says, so that's Tmani, Atlas V'Sheva. So you have 8 plus 37, Harei Arba'am V'Chamish, Nebuchadnezzar. So this is the 45 years of Nebuchadnezzar. And then, as we said before, V'Esrim Atlas, the Evel Mereidach, you have another 23 years of that Evel Mereidach was a king. So therefore now you have already 68 years. So how do we know this? Gemara. We don't have anything to prove this, that he was a king for 23 years, but this is a tradition. And then V'Tarti Day, another 2 years that Belshazzar was a king. Shivin. Those are the 70 years. So Amar, so now Belshazzar said, as we said before, Hashta Vade Sule Mifriki. The Yidden are not going to be redeemed anymore. So Apek money the Bemakdash took out the vessels of the Beis HaMikdash. Ve'ishtamish Buhu, and he used them. And what happened to Belshazzar? Hainu to Ka'amale Daniel. This is what Daniel said to Belshazzar. Valmari Shmaya Yisrei Mamta. You're rising up against the Master in heaven. Ulamanai de Beisa Hesiv, and you brought his vessels of the Beis HaMikdash to yourself to use them Kodamach in front of you. Uksiv, what does it say later in the pasuk? Bei Balelia Kotel Belshazzar Malka Kazdoi. That night, Belshazzar, the king of Bavel, died. Uksiv, and it says, Dar Yavish Madah, Dayavish from Madai, Kibul Malchusa, Kvar Shnin Shitten Vitarten. Daryavish took over the kingdom, and how old was he when he took over the kingdom? He was 62 years old. So now Omar, so Achashverosh said, Iu mitatoi. Belshazzar made a mistake, and he died. I am going to make a different calculation, and I will not make the same mistake. And what's the calculation that he made? So he said as follows: Miksiv lemalchus Bavel. Does it say in the pasuk that you count the 70 years from the beginning of the kingdom of Bavel, from when Nebuchadnezzar was appointed as a king? LeBavel ksiv. It says to Bavel. What does that mean? My LeBavel legolus Bavel. You have to count the 70 years from when the exile of Bavel begins, not from the kingdom of Bavel. Okay, but now the Gemara will explain that Achashverosh also made a mistake, because Achashverosh began counting from the first exile of Bavel, and not the second exile. The difference between the first and the second exile is 11 years. The first exile happened in the 8th year of Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom, and the second exile happened in the 19th years of his kingdom. So Achashverosh was also 11 years off. So the Gemara now explains, what was his cheshbon? Kama b'tzidon tmani. So what's the difference between from when Nebuchadnezzar was appointed as a king and when the first Galus began? There's a difference of 8 years. Only after 8 years that he was appointed as a king did he expel the first Galus into Bavel. So Achashverosh thought that Belshazzar was off only 8 years. Okay, so Kama b'tzirin tmani choshev v'ayel chilufayu. So you put in instead the following number of years over here that he made a cheshbon. Chada de Belshazzar, 1 year of Belshazzar that you have to add, and also Chomesh, another 5 years you have to add, the Daryavish v'Kairish. After Belshazzar, Daryavish took over the kingdom, as we just had before, and Kairish took over the kingdom after Daryavish. So between the two of them, it was 5 years. And then the Tarti Didei. And then Achashverosh says, another 2 years of my kingdom. So together, this is another 8 years. So Hashivin. So now we do have full 70 years from when the first Galus began. So Kivin the Chazu again, so what he saw, the Malu Shivin, that 70 years, according to his cheshbon, was already up. And V'lai Ifrik, and Yidden were not redeemed. Amma, he said, Hashtavad Sula Mifriki, the Yidden are not going to be redeemed anymore. Apik Mana de Bein Makdasha, he took the vessels out from the Beis HaMikdash, Ve'ishtamish Buhu, and he used them. What happened? Bas Satan V'rikid Beinayim, the Satan came and danced between him and his wife, and V'haragas Vashti, and Vashti got killed. But this was the cheshbon that Achashverosh made. So the Gemara asks the question, so where was he wrong with his cheshbon? Why was the Beis HaMikdash not built at that point? He made the right calculation. So the Gemara says, no, he didn't. He also made the wrong calculation. Why? He should have calculated 70 years from the second exile, which is 11 years later, when the Beis HaMikdash was actually destroyed. And that was the second pasuk that the Gemara quoted before, that you have to count L'malis l'chorvais Yerushalayim shivim shana, not from when the first exile of Bavel began. So the Gemara now makes the cheshbon, so how many years was he off? Kama b'tzirin chadeser. He was off 11 years. So now, Iu Kama Malach, Achashverosh himself, how many years was he a king? Arbeser. He was a king for 14 years. So if so, Bar Beiser Didei, in the 14th year of Achashverosh, the Beis HaMikdash should have been built then. In the 3rd year of Achashverosh, as it says in the beginning of the Megillah, in the 3rd year of his kingdom, it was 70 years from the first exile of Bavel. But he was off 11 years because he was supposed to count from the second exile, which was 11 years later. So 11 years after that, which is in the 14th year of his kingdom, that's when he should have built the Beis HaMikdash. But it didn't happen. Alama Ksiv, why does the pasuk say, Badin, Beteles, Avidas, Beis, Elokad, B'Yerushalayim? That Badin, which was in the times of Kairish, he did not allow them to build the Beis HaMikdash in Yerushalayim. So we see from this pasuk of Badin that he did not allow the Beis HaMikdash to be built in the times of Achashverosh. When was it allowed to be built? It was only allowed to be built later. Okay, so Rashi over here brings that Badin refers to a king that was after Achashverosh. And they did not yet allow the Beis HaMikdash to be built until the 2 years later. So it did not get built in the 14th year of the kingdom of Achashverosh, but there was another 2 additional years that they had to wait. So the Gemara says, Omar Rave, so Rave explains, Shanim mukutois havu. Some of the years that we mentioned before were not full years. These years were cut off one from another. And then Rashi explains what this means. For example, we said before that Nebuchadnezzar was a king for 45 years and Evil Merodach was a king for 23 years. It wasn't full 45 years because that 1 year when Nebuchadnezzar died and Evil Merodach became king, we're counting it as a year for Nebuchadnezzar and we're also counting it as a year for Evil Merodach. But really, there's a year missing there. And the same thing also afterwards, when we counted the Yavish and Kairish, we're counting it as 5 years. It really wasn't 5 years, it was 4 years. It was 1 year for their Yavish and 3 years for Kairish. So really we're 2 years off. So therefore, the Beis HaMikdash was not yet rebuilt.